It's been said that everybody's got a story to tell. Well, the person we're about to meet tonight, there's no group of people in America more prepared to argue their constitutional rights.
That's how we connect to each
Yeah.
other. That's how we connect to our communities. And that's what we tried to do here
Yes.
at the cafe.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Earl Caldwell. Welcome to Hampton University, the Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications, and to what we like to call the Caldwell Cafe. This is our gathering place for interesting conversation, and sometimes we like to say furious debate. Today, it's a lot of good conversation. We start off with Audrey Edwards. She's been in journalism and real estate, and she's an author of 7 books. But she comes and joins us today with her new book. Now, when I say she comes to join us, let me be very clear. There are no students here on the campus. The pandemic has everything shut down. There's no faculty here, but Peter Dennard is here. He's our chief engineer. And for the Caldwell Cafe, we're off on a new journey. He has us in a whole new place. We're on YouTube, and he's put it together. He's the producer, the director, and our editor. And so today we have a great show, 2 parts. First is Audrey Edwards with her new book, American Runaway. In the Caldwell Cafe in this edition, our special guest is the American Runaway. That is our friend, colleague, and longtime associate from New York, Audrey Edwards. Audrey, it is a great pleasure for us to welcome you to the Caldwell Cafe.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I say welcome and congratulations. You are a superb storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and tell us, let's start with American Runaway. You said that this is not a book about Trump. Of course it is, but it's not a book, and it truly is not a book about Trump. You know what my reaction? I said it's a book about friendship, and this remarkable friendship that you have with your college roommate from all the yes. But let me get out of the way and let you tell us about American Runaway. Where you get that name, and what does that mean?
You know, American Runaway just came to me. I knew if Trump was elected president, I was going to leave the country. Didn't think I would have to, because I didn't think he was going to win.
Right.
And I'm an American. Running away, I think of runaway as something slaves did during slavery. A slave runaway was a crime punishable by death. So runaway, that notion was always an important part of our history, going back to slavery, going back to Harriet Tubman, going back to Nat Turner, going back to Denmark Vesey. These were slaves, Frederick Douglass, who ran away. And during slavery, if a runaway was captured, 99% of the time that runaway was killed as a lesson to the other slaves to prevent them from thinking about running away. So American Runaway to me resonated with history, it resonated with slavery, and it resonated with being in a particular place in the world, which was America, which had a very particular kind of slavery. So that's where the 2 words came. One speaking to nationality, and one speaking to the experience of slavery. and what we very often did to escape that experience, which is wrong. So running to me has always been a metaphor for Black Americans. It's a revolutionary move, it's a political move, it's a move of courage, a move of daring, and it's a liberation. You ran for your freedom. And in the case of me leaving America, I was not running as a slave. I wasn't fearful of my physical life, but I was fearful what my spiritual life might become, what my psychological life might become under Donald Trump's regime. I knew this was not going to be a regime good for Black people in general, not good for me.
When did you decide?
I sort of retired. I had some money, I had some resources, and I said, if I'm going to make a move, it's time to make it.
When did you decide to make it a book?
You know what, Earl, and I said this in other conversations, I didn't go to Paris thinking I would write a book. I went to Paris thinking I was going to hang out for 3 months because I just knew that Trump was going to be gone in those first 100 days. Was I wrong? I was naive. I didn't understand the political machine of America. I think I really didn't even understand then the white supremacy and the degree to which people would be complicit in keeping him in office. I really was estimating that. So I didn't go there thinking I'd do a book. I did a piece that ran in the Huffington Post. It was out of that piece the idea for a book grew, because that piece got so much reaction, got 14,000 hits, which was enormous in my view. And it told me maybe there is an audience for a bigger look at the phenomenon of weaving.
Did you just jump in with this, or how did you bring the story together in your mind? What you wanted to do?
Part of it had to do with looking at what I was doing in Paris, what was happening, the people I was meeting, the experiences I was having. But I'm also a student of history, and my degree is in history. So I've always understood as a journalist that you have to give context, very often a historical perspective. You have to connect the dots.
Right.
And that is what history to me is. You are connecting the dots. Nothing happens in isolation. Paris has historically been a refuge for many Black Americans, going back 100 years, to the time of soldiers from World War I coming to Europe, fighting in the war. Many of them stayed because they had the kind of freedom in France that they would never have it. So that was the beginning, and the musicians came, and the artists came. Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Josephine Baker. It was a long history of Black Americans fleeing to Paris. And that had to do with the culture of the French, and how they viewed us, how we viewed Black Americans. So I wanted all of that to be a part of what I was talking about.
A lot of journalists, people are used to writing for, where they're reporting something and writing it. And when you flip that and ask them to tell their story, and I'm among them, I mean, say, oh, you run away. You embrace it. And you have this great ability to put yourself in without taking over, because you have so much just fantastic detail, but you seem so comfortable in writing about yourself. Where did that come from?
You know what, Earl? I come out of magazines, and I come out of two genres. magazines, women's magazines and black magazines. And in those two genres, through years of writing, reporting, editing, finding, I came to understand the importance of telling a particular story, whether it's a woman's story or a black story. When you work in niche magazine publishing like that, you understand how to do narratives. So in black magazines, the spin was always a black spin. You wrote black size 9. And what I loved about working with the journalists who worked with mainstream media, when they wrote for black media, they had an opportunity to give their spin from a black perspective, which was something they were not always allowed to do in so-called mainstream media. So I knew working in those media, I became comfortable doing it. And not only that, I was affirmed doing it. That's what you were supposed to do. The whole point in being acting like Family Circle was to report from a woman's point of view. The whole point of being in black media was to report from a black person's point of view. So I was doing that because that's what my career had not done anything else.
One of the things that is so remarkable in your book, part of the glue that ties it all together, is this fantastic friendship that you've had with your college roommate through all of these years. I mean, even good friends, if it is something, just apart. And also, that your college roommate was white and you African American.
Yes.
And that's just so that's going through all of these different eras where things, but you two stayed tight based on your friendship.
Yes, and I wrote about Joe in the New York Times in 1992. They had a column in the Sunday magazine called the Hers Column. And I wrote about my friendship with white men. The thing about friends, one or both can't have continuing friendship unless one stays in. Joe is the one who always stayed in touch. And what I said about her in the first time, she was a white woman, kind of girl when we met in college. She was a white person who always felt it was important to have black people in. She grew up in a resort white community in Washington State. It would be something like the Hamptons now. Predominantly white. She knew black people. She met me at 18 at the University of Washington.
Wow.
She was an art major. Her painting style reminded me of Charles White, the African-American painter. So there was something in her energy, even though she's this little, pale, white girl at the time. She had a sensibility, kind of universal. So she always stayed in touch with me. She was a letter writer, she was an email writer, she would call. I would always respond and we would stay in touch, but she kept it going. And if you have a long-running friendship, both or one is driving friendship. Which is why it's easy for people to lose track. Because if neither one is stable, you lose it. You have a lot of things, so that's what people know about you. And you are someone based on people I know who know you. You stay in touch. You are, and people like you. And that's kind of a talent, kind of, again, internal energy. And so she had that energy, had that internal energy. It was important for her to have one. And she's always had black people. I'm not her only black friend. So many white people will say, "You're my one black friend."
Yeah.
always have.
Yeah.
She lived in Vermont. The 2 or 3 black people in Vermont, well, she found one that became her good friend. She's still in touch. She's still in touch.
Wow. It's so fantastic. That's so fantastic. Audrey, are you from the Pacific Northwest?
I'm from Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah, yeah. I've been sort of taken aback by, of course, this is in Trump time, and you don't know what's going on, but the whole thing in Trump, the way he's come down on the state of Washington, and but this.
Washington is a progressive state in many ways. It's a
Yes,
progressive state.
I've always thought of it that way, but
Yeah.
I was also surprised by this sustained thing that has been going on out there.
Well, I was surprised by what was going on in Portland, but not really.
Yeah, well, I
Portland
should say Portland too.
it was
Yes,
Portland.
yeah,
It was Portland.
yeah.
And Portland is a border state. It's between Washington and California. There are only 3 states on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Washington and California are pretty progressive. Somehow, Oregon was the seat of the skinheads when I was younger. I'm not sure how its sensibility developed,
Mm.
but it's not quite the same as California or Washington State. Yeah, because lately with the protesting, the militia who were out not rounding up people, grabbing people who were protesting, all of that was an Oregon phenomenon. I'm not really sure how that came about on the West Coast. The other 2 states are so different.
Is Washington normally a Democratic-leaning state?
Yes.
Well, that would explain why Trump doesn't like it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, if you didn't vote for me, I'm gonna smash you. Audrey,
My brother-
I want to go back to your writing. How do you write? By that I mean, do you sketch things out with pencil?
No.
You're all computer.
I'm all computer. I don't do an outline.
Huh?
I approach book writing the way I approach magazine writing. I think of each chapter as a magazine piece. So that helps me with length. And it helps me with structure. In doing American Runaway, I can't say I had a beginning, middle, and an end when I started. I knew that as I wrote, that would be what directed me.
Right.
That would be, so I guess if I do an outline, it's in my head.
Wow.
And then I very often am inspired by what happened. I have a chapter in the book called Riding with the Devil. And it's a 45-minute ride with an African Uber driver, a young brother. I tell people that chapter was given to me by the ancestors.
Huh?
It was nowhere in my thinking. By the time the ride was over, I knew that I was going to incorporate what happened in the book. So I didn't start out knowing that because I hadn't ridden with Fidel. That was the driver's name. I hadn't ridden.
Do you keep
When I
a
got it,
Do
when
you
I got
keep a
into it,
journal? Are you a journal person? Do you keep a journal?
No.
Wow.
I used to keep a diary as a teenager, and my mother found it and read it, and I never kept a diary
Right.
since.
Yes. Yeah. That would stop. That put an end to that. Yeah. Understandable. Yes. 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 Oh wow. So, what do you have, about 7 books?
I have 7 books, Earl, but 4 of them are children's books and young adult books.
Right.
So
They
consider-
count too.
They do.
Yes,
I list
yes.
them in the book. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the beginner reader books were very hard to do because I had a vocabulary of 25 words, and I couldn't use anything other than those 25 words,
Wow.
which is very hard.
Yes, it would be a challenge.
Yeah. And then the other 2 books I did in collaboration. One was with my psychologist, and then the other one was Ed Lewis's.
Yeah. You know, he came down to Hampton with the book.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and I was looking forward to interviewing him because I'd done, I was on the radio in New York. I did 90 minutes with him. It was fantastic. We were going to talk here, and I had a little medical scare. And had to go to the hospital and missed the whole thing.
Oh.
I felt so bad about that. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Was that a great challenge doing
Ed was wonderful to work for and work with. And what made him so wonderful, we're both Taurus. So we're both very focused,
Right.
very deliberate. We met once a week. I would interview him. He had a beautiful suite of offices on Madison Avenue. He worked for Capitol. And we met in a little conference room that had an Asian motif. It was very serene. It was very quiet. I would take him. I would do a chapter. Because when I do a magazine piece, I would send it to him. He would read it. His wife would read it. He made very few changes to anything. And then that's what we would do the next week.
Fantastic.
Very calm. And what I loved about him, because it's hard writing something. I didn't have that person who's calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, okay, you know what? I don't want to talk about, what I did. I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
None
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, he's a wonderful person. That's great. I thought you did a beautiful job there, but your work is.
And Earl, I heard about Ed's book. Honey, this is what I love about Ed. He sold it to HBO Max. They're getting ready to do a limited series on the book.
Fantastic.
So that just happened a couple of weeks.
Ooh, fantastic. Oh, I love it. I love it. So I'm almost hesitant to ask you, but you also have this other fascinating part of your life, real estate. I love that. I love the story of the Paris. Do you still dabble in it? No, I don't. Wait, scratch dabble. Are you still involved in it?
Yes, I was Brown Harris Stevens Real Estate in New York. It's one of these high-end luxury firms. I'm in the Brooklyn office. And my manager and I just had a fight with the Department of State because they're so backed up. They were telling me first, you didn't renew your license. And of course, I renewed it. I had proof. Then they said you didn't take continuing ed. Of course, I don't have to take continuing ed because I was exempt. I've been exempt for 20 years. So yeah, I'm in real estate, fighting with the Department of State. Just got word today that everything has been approved. And my attitude was, well, if they don't approve it, I'm leaving because I was ready to retire when I went to do Ed's book. But he was so easy to work with. My office gave me a party. They're getting a going away party.
Now, wait a minute. You know there's no such thing as retirement. And also you also know that you are not the retiring type.
This I have found out.
Yeah. So, assuming this pandemic will pass, and we will get back to some sort of, will you still have your relationship with Paris?
Yeah, I have an apartment in Paris, though.
Yes, it's in your book.
No, that one I gave up.
Oh, you did?
I gave it up because it was teeny tiny.
Yes.
And Joe told me about an apartment in her building next door to her.
Oh, oh my God.
So I kind of leave sight unseen because we were in shutdown.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what it looks like. It has a balcony because it's next door to her. So it's just like hers. It's a mirror image. And it was 400 euros cheaper than the one I.
Oh.
Bigger.
But I'll tell you, I'm a big Paris, man, in my heart, all these things. I've never been there. When I was working for the New York Times, and I was leaving my post as a national correspondent in San Francisco, we were talking about what do you want to do next, and they say to me, "Well, we'd like you to go to Chicago." I said, "Oh, you must be crazy. You want me to go to Cabrini Green? I'm not doing that." But I said, "I want to go to Paris."
Yeah.
Editor laughed. He said, "Everybody does." But I hope one day that I can make that a part of.
Yeah, your experience. Yeah. Well, Cole is doing wonderfully there. He and Veronica are doing great.
Yeah. He told we spoke to him, talked with him earlier today, and yeah. And he looked great. And Joel is so focused and so into things.
He's wonderful.
Isn't he? Yes.
He and Veronica and Joe and Bob are a large part of the reason that I enjoy Paris.
Well, that's a nice little network to start with,
Yeah.
Yes, and at the end of the day, friendship is what really decides so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was on the show Here and Now yesterday with Sandra Bookman, who I liked a lot. One of the things I said, I would never go to a big city not knowing.
Right.
Having a friend. It could just be one, but I would have to have someone who constitutes part of the community.
Do you have another book in the hopper?
There is. I can't really discuss it.
I don't know. I'm only just. It is. Yeah. I know it'll be fantastic. I'm in love with your writing style.
Thank
you have that breezy,
It's a magazine writing style. It's a magazine, and people, they used to kind of put down magazine writing, but I always liked magazine writing because you have to be objective, and the whole point of magazine writing is to have a voice. Magazines hinge on a voice, so that's where I'm working in magazine.
Do you work with an editor when you're writing? Do you have an editor that you work with, Rick?
I had two good friends who had both been magazine editors at Redbook.
Oh.
So we went back 50 years. And those two, and Joe also, read the manuscript. I had a copy editor when the manuscript was finished, but I needed an editor who functioned a little higher than a reader. But a good editor is first a reader.
Right.
And a good editor will say, one example, Sandy Satterwhite, I don't know if you know her.
Yes.
Yeah, Sandy is a good friend. There's a chapter in the book where I go to have lunch with my landlord's mother. And these are upper class French people. It's a 4-course lunch. And we're sitting in this great apartment in 15 rooms. And I'm describing what happened. And Sandy said, "What did you have for lunch?" And I said, "What?" She said, "What did you have for lunch?" Because I had talked about this 4-course meal, and she wanted to know what we had. And that was the detail. Those are the kind of details that give another richness to the story.
Yeah.
And I would not have thought of it.
Yeah.
And she said, "What did you have for lunch?" And gave a whole paragraph on what we had for lunch. Which was a way of, instead of just saying 4 courses, we had quiche and salad.
Yeah.
And then we had potatoes and white fish, and so it was, so people could see, oh, you have lunch and
yes.
crab.
That detail is so rich, and and you are a great storyteller. And when you put those together, you can't beat it. Listen.
we have great stories to tell.
Yeah.
I've always
Yes. Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
it is so wonderful for you to be here on the Caldwell Cafe.
So delighted that you invited me. I
Fed,
wanted to do, you know what? I'm going to take another picture. Be, I wanted to do your class, Earl, forever. I
well,
really have.
I'm going to tell you, I'm gonna talk this up down here and see what we can make you an offer that you can't refuse.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's the highest compliment.
Thank you so much. All the best to you, and it is
Thank you. You
wonderful
too.
having you. And
And when you're in
again,
New York, Earl, call me when you're in New York. I would
oh,
love to see
absolutely. And
you.
let
Yeah.
me say in it, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Be safe.
You too. Appreciate it.
American Runaway, Black and Free in Paris in the Trump Years, the new book by Audrey Edwards, is available from Amazon.com.
Next up in the Caldwell Cafe here on YouTube, Joel Dreyfuss. Joel is a legendary figure in American journalism over the last half century. Yes, it's a long arc. But Joel goes back to the tumultuous 1960s, and he's made the change. He's come along, and he's one of the few journalists who made the seamless leap right on into the world of high tech. Actually, started off with that journey with an editorship at the Wired magazine, which was one of the early publications as we transition. But today he joins us from Paris, and he has what Paul Harvey in the old days used to say, the rest of the story. Joel, today we welcome you back, but instead of us talking face to face, the pandemic has us operating at long distance. The students are scattered around the country. You are in Paris, France, and I'm here at Hampton University in the Scripps Howard studio. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you. Glad to be with you again.
Today we're really, it's built around a book of a friend of yours and mine, Audrey Edwards, American Runaway. And she has a wonderful, I call it a memoir, but she's quite the storyteller too. And she has a very nice book about a promise she made if Trump was elected president of the United States, thus American Runaway. She came to Paris running away. You were in Paris now, but not running away. You were running to a city that you loved, in a country that you have deep roots, and you are part of that global community of people who are really global residents. Your home is in New York, but we're in this age of the big jets, and it allows you to have more than one residence. How has France been treating you?
Well, France has been good for me because, as you said, I came here for a number of reasons. I came here before Trump was elected, so I can't blame him for my being here. But my family has roots in France. I was born in Haiti. I have a French grandfather. I spent time here in childhood, and my family has had some presence in this city for at least 5 or 6 generations. So I came here for different reasons, but I've been an observer of the post-Trump or the Trump era exile community, which is smaller. I mean, a lot of people threatened to leave when Trump got elected. Audrey was one of the few people who actually got up and did it.
Audrey talks about her own the American politics and the chaos that she was sure that Trump would bring. A lot of African Americans feared that Trump would be the one that would take us back in years by wiping out many of the gains that we've made. And it's not just Trump, well, he's the leader of the party, the Republican Party, but they have been wiping out voting rights, the Voting Rights Act, which you recall here, and a lot of other, but he comes in as a president now when a new generation of young black Americans are trying to deal with some of the issues that have been with us for so many years, and foremost perhaps among those, along with jobs or an income, I would say would be the relationship between police and black communities. I know that you've written a lot, reported a lot on that across America in your time as a reporter in the streets here. But what is the flip side? What is this? What is the relationship in France between the dark-skinned people and the police, and in Paris too?
Well, it's interesting because we've had some of the events that have taken place here, you would think were in the U.S. We've had huge Black Lives Matter rallies. There have been a lot of protests against police brutality. There have been several cases of the killing of unarmed young men that have triggered protests, even a fair amount of violence. Back in 2005, I think, when Sarkozy, a previous president, was Minister of the Interior, two young men who were running from the police were electrocuted. They went to hide in some electrical equipment, and it caused a huge number of riots, car burnings, and in the poorer communities around Paris and other major cities here. So there is a lot of tension. The level of violence is probably much lower than in the United States because there are fewer guns. But some of the tensions have the same roots, that people who are privileged versus people who are seen as outsiders.
Is that a rare happening, or do you notice any increases in which way do you see it going? Or
I think it's getting a lot more attention. As I
Right.
said, the numbers are much smaller. I mean, one of the things about Europe is because there's not the proliferation of guns, levels of violence are far lower than in the United States. The murder rate here is 1/7 the murder rate in the US, for example. So that when somebody is killed, it's actually national news and seen and discussed all over the country. We just had a big shock here in the last couple of weeks where a teacher was murdered by a Muslim fanatic, and he was beheaded, which caused quite a shock. And there was a ceremony, a memorial service for him, attended by the president of France. So because this is a smaller country, it's 60 million people instead of 300 million, incidents are very personal and people know, and as a result, it's much more personal than in the US.
And also, the American situation has that huge component of the slavery, the long period of slavery, and all that came after that. Joe, is the racism in France, is it more about skin color, or is it more about religion there?
Well, the history of race in France is different. The history with black people is very different. France never had large numbers of slaves in France itself. They were mostly in the colonies. At one point, France, as you know, had a vast empire in Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia. And in the Caribbean, and Haiti was a French colony, was driven by slave labor, but you saw very few slaves in Paris or in other cities in France in that colonial period. The large numbers of blacks came during World War I to fight for France, and between World War I and World War II, there was another wave of migration from French colonies. But it's really since the 1950s that large numbers have come and settled, mainly because of possibility of work that was available for them.
In France being a part of the European Union, how does that figure into it which allows this great movement of people with open borders?
Well, once you have a visa, or once you're legally in any one of a dozen countries, there's a group of countries called the Schengen group that includes Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, which allows people to move freely within these various countries. And interestingly, France is not the usual destination for refugees from Africa, for example. They much prefer to go to the UK or to Germany, where they feel there's greater economic opportunity. But France does have a large North African population. It has a large black population, probably because there are no official statistics. It's estimated by most people that between 5 and 8% black, and maybe as much as 10% from North African origins.
Wow, that's very interesting. I would think it would be just the opposite. I would think that the immigrants, but they are seeking it's economic, and so I guess that makes sense. Within France, the Muslim communities have, how would I say, have had sort of a rocky road in finding their way. Would that be right?
I would say so. That I think there's much more fear of the Muslim community than of the black community in France. Although the black community is largely Muslims because of African immigration. Immigrants from the Caribbean tend to be Christian or Catholic. Immigrants from Africa are in large proportion Muslim. So there's tension there. And there's the sense among the French that there's this militant Islamic movement. As you know, France has been victim of terror attacks that have been considerable, like the 2015 when the shootings in the rock club, the Bataclan, and other incidents that have occurred. There's a greater fear of Arab immigration than there is, I think, of immigration from Africa, from Black Africa, or from the Caribbean, which most of the Caribbean immigrants from Martinique, Guadeloupe are already French citizens and are freely allowed to move between mainland France and their places of origin. So they're not technically immigrants, but they're just a portion of the black population here.
What is the relationship now with France and Haiti?
Well, Haiti won a battle with France for its independence 220 years ago in 1804, and they've had relations up and down. Haiti paid a huge indemnity to French former slave owners for for them losing their property, and that set Haiti on the path to poverty that it's still struggling with to this day.
Joel, again, back to the issue of race, when you look at not just France, but the whole of Western Europe, where you have great economic issues and of jobs, involving jobs and incomes, is this a rising thing that stems across that whole region, or do you see that? Do you see it as something that is effectively being dealt with in a positive way?
It varies a lot from one country to the other. The country that comes closest to the US is probably the United Kingdom, England, where you see blacks across the whole spectrum, politics, literary, government. There's a significant black presence in the UK, and you see black folks holding serious and important positions. It's much less so in France. France, the black success is still largely athletics, entertainment, and the penetration of blacks into corporate France and to the elite of the universities and the corporations is very slim still at this time. We're in the 1950s in comparison to the United States.
Joel, do you see that is race a factor in the Brexit, the whole Brexit thing in the UK?
Well, race is a factor in the fact that the Brexit has been driven largely by a fear of immigration. And most of that immigration has been from countries where people are brown skinned.
Right.
So there's a direct correlation, although it's been carefully sold as not being about that. Same way that in the United States, nobody says we want to keep more brown people out of the United States, but that's the impact of immigration laws.
News is so international, so global now. Does the Black Lives Matter movement here, does that have any, what would I say, spillover or influence in France?
It has huge influence. There was a big rally some months ago before the COVID crisis, which drew literally 100,000 people. And this was over the death of a young man who died in very much a situation similar to George Floyd, where he was being restrained by police and died. So the young black generation of French look very much to the U.S. as a model for their own struggle, and they imitate or borrow from many of the tactics, the demonstrations, the language, talking about systematic racism, all of this which the French establishment would like to deny, and does deny. They're very offended at the idea that there's any kind of systemic racism in France.
You mentioned the young blacks there. Are you speaking? Are these immigrants coming from the Caribbean or Africa, or are these native French?
Well, in many cases they're second and third generation immigrants. Okay. France has a demographic system where the cities, it's unlike the U.S. The cities are so expensive that the poor or working class people tend to live in the immediate ring of suburbs around the cities. So they're called banlieues. And these banlieues are tough. There's a lot of fairly new housing, high-rise, sort of like housing projects in the States. And there's a lot of crime and violence in these communities, a lot of drug trade. There are areas where cops are afraid to go into. So it's seen as the source of all of France's problems without them addressing the exclusion and the limited opportunities that minorities have. It's very difficult to get a good education if you're from one of those communities. It's very difficult to get a job if you have an address in one of these communities. So it's geographically it's different from the States, but it's very much the same kind of issues.
Yeah, well, as you described that there, it sounds like you could have been talking about Chicago, with the projects, or Detroit, or so many American cities. And
and some of these projects look
it's like a breeding ground. A lot of all negative comes out of those situations. In France, do you feel the government is more tuned in to the complaints rising out of there and more apt to be on the road to some positive solutions?
No, I don't think so. I think they're still in denial. The latest example is this young man, this teacher, 40-something-year-old teacher who was killed a couple of weeks ago by a young Muslim fanatic. And the government has come up with all kinds of laws that they want to pass. They want to control the certification of imams, which has gotten some of the Muslim world pretty upset. But all the rules are about controlling militancy and trying to eradicate Islamic militancy, but there's very little addressing the root causes of the alienation of many of these young people.
Your life has been revolved around in so much in your work as a newsman. Is the institution of the news media there? Do they cover this issue of race and these complaints and these situations in a very positive, well, not more of a comprehensive way than here in the United States? Or is it, again, sort of a reflection, the same kind of approach?
I think it's very cautious. It's very limited. There's very little diversity in the media. As far as I know, there's not a single French newspaper that has a regular black columnist, for example.
Wow.
There's on television, black faces are few and far between. Many of these discussions about what they're going to do about the blacks and what they're going to do about the Arabs are among white men and some women, some white women. It's still rare to have somebody of color involved in public debate on a kind of rational level.
I remember in the 60s when we had all of the uprisings going around black communities across the United States, there would be these journalists that would come from Western Europe, France, Britain, and primarily, and they would come and seek out black journalists and say, "Oh, we don't understand. We don't have that problem. And so now they can't do that. They have that problem, but it seems that you're saying that it's the same. Again, it's a reflection of what is here. We don't have the diversity in the media, and the stories are not really covered. Or as the Kerner report 50 years ago said, the American press couldn't effectively cover the the struggle of black people if it wanted to, because the media is basically all white, all male. And all these years later, that still is a valid argument to make. I think the social media, to some degree, has maybe put more focus on that. Does social media impact a full piece of the media there also?
Oh yeah, social media here has a huge impact, particularly since the pathways to the regular media are so limited. Since you don't have black columnists or Arab columnists, since you don't have reporters on the ground who are comfortable in these communities of color, a lot of the reporting is official reporting. You know, the government says this, experts say that. There's very little on the ground reporting, talking to ordinary people in these communities, and stereotypes often go unchallenged. So they're way behind here, but definitely social media is how the massive demonstrations are organized. They often shock the establishment of the police because they haven't been following what these groups are doing, and they're absolutely stunned by the turnout, the ability to turn out 50,000, 100,000 people.
That is amazing, though, to draw crowds that large where you don't have that. It seems that's also says that they're beginning to, the blacks, the people of color, are beginning to have allies in the white communities. As you, Black Lives Matter here, which made this uprising of now so different from that of 50 years ago, when the protests were all black. You wouldn't see any whites, and now
Well,
you see
don't
there's
forget-
a large white gathering. Is that
Don't
same
forget,
true with your
don't-
large?
But don't forget, you're forgetting the civil rights movement had a lot of whites involved.
Yes.
It was it was when the Black Power movement came into play that you saw the disappearance of white participants. But some of the early stuff you covered, there were a lot of white marchers, freedom riders, and so forth. So we've kind of come back around to the multiracial protests.
Speaking of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., of course, was one of the great leaders, and he was the advocate of the nonviolent approach, and it was widely, that was the mantra of the civil rights movement. Is that also true there? Is it, does the movements there advocate nonviolence?
The movement advocates nonviolence, but they're not leaders in the way that they are in the United States. So it's I couldn't name 3 or 4 people who have the kind of presence or influence that King and others had in those days. And it's mostly been a mass movement. They've tried to have dispersed leadership, and you don't have a single figure who symbolizes the struggle as you had in the States, which may be good.
Joe, listen, it's so great to talk with you this morning. You still have that reporter's instinct that you're on top of all of these happenings, and I appreciate your sharing your ideas and your reporting with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and it's good to have you back in at the Caldwell Cafe. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.